The Old Spacer's Corner. In the bustling streets of Station Miasma, where countless alien species mingled beneath artificial skies, Gesalec sat in his favorite corner of the stellar wind bar. His weathered face and tired eyes held the wisdom of 170 galactic years, each wrinkle telling a story of distant worlds and forgotten adventures. The bar's soft amber lighting cast dancing shadows across his face as he observed the parade of life flowing past his chosen spot. An unexpected visitor. The day's usual rhythm broke when a towering figure approached his table. Standing at an impressive 2.5 meters, the creature's four muscular arms and leather-like plated torso commanded attention. Its triangular head housed 6 alert eyes, and between them sat a pair of flaring nostrils above a mouth filled with dozens of needle-sharp teeth, including 8 prominent fangs that gleamed in the bar's dim light. "You are Gesalec of the Thero." The stranger's voice carried the weight of authority. Gesalec studied the being before him, his mind racing through centuries of encounters. "I am," he replied carefully. "And who might you be?" "I am Buhazam of the Cudraix." The name that brought fear. Recognition flickered in Gesalec's eyes. The Cudraix, warriors from the Rim, rarely seen without their distinctive armor and enclosed helmets. Their reputation preceded them. Conquerors who had carved out their territory through blood and fire, particularly at the expense of the peaceful Fatiri just 5 years ago. A dangerous proposition. Without invitation, Buhazam lowered himself into the chair opposite Gesalec. "I understand you know many things about this sector." "Yes, I am well-traveled," Gesalec answered cautiously. "Good. You will come with me." The bluntness of the statement caught Gesalec off guard. "Why in the hell would I do that?" "To meet my superiors. You will be well compensated." The journey to power. The mention of payment changed everything. After a brief negotiation, Gesalec found himself following the towering Cudraix through the station's pristine corridors to Compartment 10, Level 1, the first-class quarters. The royal presence. The door slid open to reveal a sight that made Gesalec's breath catch. 11 Cudraix occupied the room, but what struck him wasn't their number, it was their appearance. Unlike Buhazam, these wore elaborate clothing that concealed their natural armor. 6 were clearly guards, their stance and alertness betraying their profession despite their civilian dress. A chilling realization struck him. If the Cudraix could hide so easily in plain sight, how many more were scattered across the sector, watching, waiting? The meeting that changed everything. Buhazam stepped forward and bowed deeply. "This is Gesalec of Thero, as ordered, Your Majesty." The words hit Gesalec like a physical blow. "Royalty? Here." He managed a hasty bow, his mind racing with implications. A richly dressed Cudraix stepped forward. "I am Inubasa, vests to Empress Shiptu, second wife of Emperor Anunnaki IV." The gesture swept toward a regally positioned figure who acknowledged Gesalec with the slightest nod. The War Council. Another figure emerged from the group, Grand Stratego and Shag Kushana. With a press of a button, a holographic map of the sector materialized before them, political boundaries glowing in various colors. "We are embarking on a new campaign," the Grand Stratego announced, his voice filled with barely contained excitement. "We need information about potential opponents, their military capabilities, their alliances, and their crucial worlds." The moral dilemma. Horror gripped Gesalec's heart. "I can't do that," he blurted out. "Help you kill an untold number of sentients." The Empress nodded to Inubasa, who stepped forward smoothly. "The Empress understands your reluctance and offers compensation of 2 million galactic credits." The sum nearly knocked Gesalec from his feet. It was enough to buy a small station of his own. As his conscience wrestled with greed, the weight of the decision pressed down on him like a gravitational well. The target. Finally, Grand Stratego and Shag Kushana pointed to a section of the map. "We plan to attack these Hammonds and absorb their territory. Our intelligence suggests they maintain a minimal fleet and fear war. They will likely negotiate their surrender. Gesalec's blood ran cold as realization dawned. You mean to attack the humans? He asked, carefully pronouncing the word correctly. Yes, in 2 standard months, the Grand Stratego confirmed with a predatory smile. The color drained from Gesalec's face as he whispered, no one in their right mind attacks the humans. The dangerous pride. Grand Stratego and Shag Kush Anna's laughter filled the luxurious compartment. Why is that? They barely have a dozen systems while we command thousands. What threat could a race afraid of war pose to the mighty Cudraix Empire? Gesalec muttered under his breath. Ask the Tekarzions, not intending for anyone to hear, but the Cudraix's superior hearing caught his words. These Tekarzions, how do we contact them? The Grand Stratego's interest peaked. A grim truth. You can't, Gesalec replied, his voice heavy with meaning. They're extinct in this sector. Only whispered rumors remain of small drifter fleets of survivors, never staying in one place too long, always running, always hiding. The Empress leaned forward slightly, her interest clearly piqued. The other Cudraix shifted uncomfortably, sensing the weight in Gesalec's words. The Lost Empire. Over 80 galactic years ago, Gesalec began, his finger tracing across the holographic map. The Tekarzions controlled most of this sector, 138 systems, 600 habitable planets and moons, hundreds more rich with resources waiting to be harvested. His finger stopped, pointing downward, including this very planet we orbit now. The fall from power. The Tekarzions were like you once. Gesalec continued, his eyes distant with remembered stories. They saw the humans as primitive, weak. They noticed how long it took humanity to leave their home system, almost 2 centuries after their first steps into space. They assumed this meant humans were slow, unintelligent. The dark truth. But do you know why it took them so long to leave their cradle? Gesalec asked, his voice dropping lower. They were too busy fighting each other. Their entire history is written in blood and fire. Not civil wars. They weren't even unified. Multiple nations, countless conflicts, centuries of warfare. The first contact. When they finally discovered they weren't alone in the universe, when a damaged alien ship fell into their system, they united. Not out of fear, but hope. They dreamed of meeting other life forms. They explored. They traded. They shared knowledge freely. Gesalec's voice turned bitter. They were trusting. The fatal mistake. The Tekarzions saw this trust as weakness. They entered humanity's home system without warning, weapons blazing. The humans suffered massive casualties initially, but they weren't helpless. They'd been practicing the art of war since they first picked up stones as weapons. Gesalec's voice grew quieter, more intense. The Tekarzions, in their arrogance, committed an act that would seal their fate. As they retreated from that first battle, they launched a biological weapon at Earth, humanity's cradle world. They intended to wipe out the species. Instead, they created something worse than death. The weapon devastated Earth's ecosystems. Vast regions became sterile wastelands, but the biological agents, they weren't as effective against humans as planned. Humanity had spent millennia fighting diseases, building immunity, surviving plagues. Most adults survived, became sick but recovered. But their children, Gesalec paused, his voice thick with emotion. Their children died by the millions. And that's when everything changed. The Tekarzions didn't just make enemies that day, they awakened something ancient and terrible in the human psyche. The understanding. You see, Gesalec leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. Humans are not afraid of war because they fear death or defeat. They fear war because they know what it turns them into. They know the darkness that lurks in their souls, waiting to be unleashed. In their language, they have countless words for revenge. Vendetta, retribution, reprisal, vengeance, each with its own shade of meaning, its own level of darkness. But what the Tekarzions triggered, they call it blood vengeance, a debt that can only be paid in the complete destruction of those who wronged them. The hidden horror. I once had a human friend who showed me their history, Gesalec continued, his voice shaking slightly. I've seen much in my years, but what they had done to each other, it horrified me. And that was to their own kind. Imagine what they would do to an alien race that killed their children. The gathering storm. As Gesalec finished speaking, a heavy silence fell over the room. Even the proud Cudraix warriors seemed affected by his words. The Empress's eyes were fixed on him, unblinking, while the Grand Strategy's expression had become unreadable. You speak of ancient history, the Grand Stratego finally said, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. Surely they have changed in the decades since. Gesalec shook his head slowly. The darkness still lurks within them. They chain it, they control it, they fear it. But it's always there, waiting, and you're planning to do exactly what would unleash it. Tell us. The Empress spoke again, silencing the murmurs of protest from her advisors. What happened after the biological attack? How did such a small race defeat an empire? Gesalec took a deep breath, his eyes distant with remembered horror. The humans went silent for 3 months. Complete communications blackout. The Tekarzions celebrated, believing they'd struck a killing blow. They were wrong. From their shipyards emerged vessels unlike anything seen before. Black as the void itself, with sharp angles and wing-like projections that made them look like predatory birds of nightmare. They named their new fleet the Razors of Retribution. Every ship bore the names of dead children on their hulls, a constant reminder of why they fought. But it wasn't just their ships that changed, Gesalec continued. Their soldiers, they transformed their very appearance into weapons of psychological warfare. Their combat armor, midnight black, with helmets crafted to resemble monsters from both human and Tekarzion nightmares. They studied Tekarzion mythology, found their deepest fears, and became those fears. The humans developed new tactics, blending their ancient warfare methods with space combat. They'd strike from nowhere, destroy vital installations, and vanish before reinforcements arrived. They'd leave survivors, not out of mercy, but as psychological weapons to spread fear through their tales. The Tekarzions couldn't understand it, Gesalec explained. Their military doctrine was based on honor, direct confrontation, showing strength. The humans, they fought like ghosts, like demons. They'd attack civilian targets one day, military the next. They'd spare a colony only to destroy it weeks later when reinforcements arrived to protect it. The Empress leaned forward, her 6 eyes fixed on Gesalec. But surely the Tekarzions' superior numbers. Numbers meant nothing, Gesalec interrupted. The humans had mastered something the Tekarzions never understood. Asymmetric warfare. They never fought fair, never attacked where they were expected. Their ships could appear anywhere, strike anywhere. They'd weaponized fear itself. He described how the humans developed their infamous Ghost Protocol, ships that could move silent and invisible through Tekarzion space, appearing only to deliver destruction. They created AI systems that could predict Tekarzion fleet movements with terrifying accuracy. They turned asteroids into weapons, hurling them at Tekarzion worlds with mass drivers. But the worst part, Gesalec's voice dropped to a whisper. They made sure the Tekarzions knew who was coming. Their ships would broadcast on all frequencies, the sounds of human children laughing, crying, playing, mixed with countdown timers to destruction. The psychological impact was devastating. The humans didn't just fight a war. They conducted a campaign of systematic annihilation. They didn't want to defeat the Tekarzions. They wanted to erase them. Military installations, civilian centers, cultural artifacts. Everything was targeted. They salted the earth of conquered worlds, making them uninhabitable. They called it Operation Nightmare's Wake, Gesalec continued. Each strike was precisely calculated for maximum psychological impact. They'd attack during religious festivals, on historically significant dates. They'd destroy sacred sites last, forcing the Tekarzions to watch their culture being systematically erased. The Cudraix guards shifted uncomfortably as Gesalec described how the humans would sometimes occupy a world just long enough to set up massive holographic displays, broadcasting images of Earth's dead children across Tekarzion cities before reducing those cities to ash. The Tekarzions tried to surrender 4 times, Gesalec said. The humans ignored every attempt. This wasn't a war for territory or resources. It wasn't even about revenge anymore. It had become an extinction event. The Grand Stractigo's face had lost its earlier arrogance. How? How long did this last? 5 years, Gesalec replied. 5 years of systematic, calculated destruction. The humans never rushed. They made sure each blow was felt, each loss was mourned, before striking again. They wanted the Tekarzions to feel the same prolonged agony they had experienced watching their children die. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. And remember, this wasn't their entire species fighting. Most humans remained on their worlds, rebuilding. This destruction was carried out by less than 10% of their population. Imagine what they could do if they committed their entire species to war. The room had grown deathly quiet. Even the guards stood motionless, their earlier confidence replaced by an uncomfortable awareness of what they might be about to provoke. So you see, Gesalec concluded, when I say the humans aren't afraid of war because of what others might do to them, but because of what it makes them become, this is what I mean. They fear their own capacity for systematic cruelty, their ability to plan and execute extinction-level events with cold, calculating precision. The Empress raised a hand, silencing the Grand Stractigo before he could speak. Continue, she commanded. Tell us how this ended. Gesalec shifted in his seat, the weight of the memories visible in his expression. The humans had a saying from their history: salt the earth. It meant to make conquered land uninhabitable. But they took it further. They didn't just destroy Tekarzion worlds. They erased them from existence. Their fleets moved with terrible purpose, each strike calculating maximum damage. Mass drivers hurled asteroids at planetary defense installations. Biological weapons, designed specifically for Tekarzion physiology, turned thriving colonies into tombs. Nuclear fire cleansed anything that remained. But it wasn't just about destruction, Gesalec continued. They turned the Tekarzions' own communication networks against them. Every victory, every obliterated world, was broadcast across the Empire. They wanted every Tekarzion to know what was coming, to live in fear of the black ships appearing in their skies. The humans developed specialized units called Nightmare Legions. These soldiers underwent extreme psychological conditioning to become living weapons. Their armor incorporated advanced stealth technology and neural interfaces. They could move unseen through Tekarzion strongholds, appearing only to eliminate high-value targets. The psychological impact was devastating, Gesalec explained. Tekarzion commanders would be found dead in locked rooms, security footage showing nothing. Political leaders would vanish from heavily guarded compounds. The humans made sure to leave evidence that they could strike anywhere, at anyone, at any time. They developed weapons specifically designed to exploit Tekarzion vulnerabilities. Sonic weapons that could shatter their natural armor. Chemical agents that would trigger their hibernation responses, leaving them helpless. Every aspect of Tekarzion biology and psychology was turned into a weapon against them. But perhaps most terrifying was their patience, Gesalec said. They never rushed, never allowed the Tekarzions to force them into direct confrontation. They would spend months planning single strikes, ensuring maximum psychological impact. They wanted the Tekarzions to have time to fear, to understand the inevitability of their doom. The Empress leaned forward. You speak of their military prowess, but surely their economy couldn't sustain such a campaign. Gesalec laughed bitterly. That's what makes humans truly terrifying. War transforms their entire society. Their civilian industries converted to military production with frightening efficiency. Their scientists, their engineers, their doctors, all turned their skills to developing more effective ways of killing. He described how human entertainment during this period shifted entirely to war propaganda. Their artists created works celebrating their victories. Their children played games simulating battles. Their entire culture became focused on a single purpose: the extinction of those who had harmed them. They called it total war, Gesalec explained. Every aspect of their society, every resource, every individual dedicated to the war effort. They didn't just want to win. They wanted to ensure no one would ever dare harm their children again. The Nightmare Legions grew in power and effectiveness. They developed technologies that could detect Tekarzion biosignatures through walls, that could track their neural patterns across star systems. Every weakness, every fear, every vulnerability was cataloged and exploited. But here's what truly separated them from other warrior races, Gesalec said. They kept detailed records of everything. Every operation, every tactic, every psychological impact. They studied their own methods, refined them, improved them. They turned warfare into a science. The Grand Stratego's face had grown pale. You mean? Yes, Gesalec nodded. Everything they learned, every technique they developed, every weapon they created, they still have it all. They maintain their Nightmare Legions, keep their black ships ready, not because they want to use them, but because they know what they're capable of if pushed too far. The humans had created special training facilities where their soldiers could experience simulated combat against various alien species. They'd maintained vast databases of xenobiological information, constantly updating their tactical approaches based on new information. They call it the Archive of Necessity, Gesalec said quietly. Everything they know about killing other species, preserved and refined, ready to be used if needed. Not because they want to, but because they never want to be unprepared again. The room had grown deathly quiet. Even the guards seemed to be holding their breath. And now, Gesalec concluded, you're planning to do exactly what the Tekarzions did, to threaten them, to force them into war, to awaken that darkness they struggle so hard to keep contained. The Empress's voice cut through the silence. Tell us about the end. Tell us what happened to the Tekarzion homeworld. Gesalec's eyes moved to the window, where the dead world hung in space below them. You're looking at it, he said softly. What was once the crown jewel of the Tekarzion Empire is now just another warning to the galaxy. Never harm humanity's children. Gesalec watched as realization dawned on the Cudraix faces around him. The dead world below, Miasma, had once been the heart of a mighty empire. Now it served as nothing more than a grim monument to humanity's vengeance. The siege of the Tekarzion homeworld lasted 47 days. Gesalec continued, his voice hollow. But the humans didn't bombard it immediately. First, they surrounded it with their black ships, forming a barrier that blocked out the sun. They called it the Shroud of Judgment. For those 47 days, they forced the Tekarzions to watch recordings of their empire's destruction. Massive holographic displays showed endless footage of burning worlds, shattered fleets, and ruined civilizations. Every few hours, they would interrupt these images with recordings of human children, playing, laughing, then screaming as the biological weapons took effect. The psychological warfare was beyond anything seen before or since, Gesalec said. They broadcast on all frequencies in all Tekarzion dialects. Messages of doom mixed with children's nursery rhymes. Some Tekarzion soldiers went mad just from the constant psychological assault. The Empress's 6 eyes narrowed. Why such elaborate measures? Why not simply destroy them immediately? Because this wasn't just about killing them, Gesalec explained. The humans wanted to ensure that the memory of what happens when you harm their children would echo through history. They wanted every species in the galaxy to know the price of such actions. On the 47th day, the Nightmare Legions descended. They didn't target military installations or government centers. Instead, they systematically captured Tekarzion historical sites, museums, and cultural centers. They downloaded every piece of Tekarzion history, art, and culture they could find. Do you know why they preserved these records? Gesalec asked rhetorically. So there would be proof that the Tekarzions had existed, so their extinction wouldn't be forgotten. They wanted their fate to serve as an eternal warning. The humans developed a specific protocol for the final assault. They called it Operation Echo. It began with a synchronized strike from orbit, thousands of kinetic bombardment rods striking key points across the planet's surface. The impacts were precisely calculated to crack the planet's crust in specific patterns. They didn't just want to kill the Tekarzions, Gesalec continued. They wanted to destroy their world so thoroughly that it would never support life again. They had spent months studying the planet's geological composition, identifying exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. The bombardment continued for 3 days. The humans used everything in their arsenal: nuclear weapons, antimatter bombs, mass drivers hurling asteroids. They didn't stop until the planet's atmosphere was stripped away, its surface reduced to radioactive glass. But even that wasn't enough, Gesalec said quietly. They introduced engineered bacteria that would continue breaking down the planet's remaining organic matter for centuries. They wanted to ensure that nothing would ever grow here again. The Grand Strategigo had lost all traces of his earlier arrogance. How many survived? The humans allowed exactly 1,000 Tekarzions to escape, Gesalec replied. Not out of mercy, but to serve as living witnesses. These survivors were psychologically broken. Many couldn't even speak about what they'd seen. They scattered across the galaxy, becoming the drifters I mentioned earlier. The humans renamed the dead world Miasma, a term from their language meaning a poisonous atmosphere. They established the station we're on now as a permanent memorial and warning. Every ship that passes through this sector sees the ruined world below and knows its history. After the war, Gesalec continued, the humans did something unexpected. They withdrew to their territories. They dismantled most of their black ships, stood down their nightmare legions, but they kept all the knowledge, all the technologies they'd developed, ready to be used again if necessary. The room had grown so quiet that Gesalec could hear the station's environmental systems humming. The Cudraix warriors, who had seemed so confident earlier, now looked shaken. So when I say the humans fear war, Gesalec concluded, it's not because they can't fight. It's because they know exactly what they're capable of. They fear the darkness inside them, the cold efficiency with which they can exterminate an entire species. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. And now you're planning to do exactly what the Tekarzions did, to threaten their worlds, their people, their children. The Empress raised her hand, silencing the Grand Strategigo before he could speak. There is more to tell, she said. It wasn't a question. Gesalec nodded slowly. Yes, Your Majesty. Because what happened after the war, that's what truly shows why humans are so feared in the galaxy. The price of victory. When the dust settled and the fires cooled, Gesalec continued, the humans did something that shocked the galaxy even more than their campaign of vengeance. They looked at what they had become, and they were horrified. The humans gathered on their homeworld for what they called the Reconciliation Summit. Military leaders, politicians, scientists, all those who had participated in the extinction of the Tekarzions. They spent weeks reviewing their actions, documenting everything they had done. They created something they called the Archive of Atonement. Gesalec explained. Every atrocity, every war crime, every act of vengeance, all carefully recorded, not to glorify their victory, but to ensure they never forgot the cost of unleashing their darkness. The Empress tilted her head. They felt remorse after what the Tekarzions did to their children. That's what makes humans unique, Gesalec replied. They're capable of both ultimate destruction and profound reflection. They recognize that in avenging their children, they had become something their children would have feared. The humans established new protocols, new laws governing warfare. They created the restraint doctrine, a complex set of rules designed to prevent them from ever again unleashing their full capacity for violence. They built memorial centers on every human world, displaying the records of what they had done to the Tekarzions. But here's the truly terrifying part. Gesalec leaned forward. They kept everything. Every weapon, every tactical innovation, every psychological warfare technique. Not because they wanted to use them, but because they understood that knowing what they're capable of helps them control it. The Nightmare Legions weren't disbanded. They were transformed. Their training now focused equally on combat and ethical restraint. Their black ships weren't scrapped but sealed away in hidden bases, ready to be unleashed only in the most extreme circumstances. The humans have a saying, Gesalec said. The best weapon is one you never have to fire. They maintain their capacity for ultimate warfare precisely so they never have to use it. The mere knowledge of what they can do is usually enough to prevent conflict. He described how human diplomatic missions always include subtle reminders of their capabilities. Their ambassadors carry small pieces of Tekarzion technology. Their diplomatic vessels bear barely visible marks that mimic their war-era designs. They don't threaten, Gesalec explained. They don't boast. They simply remind. And that's usually enough. Because everyone in the galaxy knows what happens when humans are pushed too far. The Grand Stratego's face had become a mask of confusion. But our intelligence reports, they show the humans maintaining only a modest fleet. Their military spending is minimal compared to ours. Gesalec laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's because they don't need a large standing army. They can mobilize their entire civilization for war in a matter of weeks. Every human knows the protocols, the procedures. It's built into their education, their culture. He turned to the Empress. Your Majesty, when your intelligence services report that humans fear war, they're not wrong. But they fundamentally misunderstand the nature of that fear. Humans don't fear defeat. They fear what victory turns them into. The room had grown deathly quiet as Gesalec's words sank in. Even the guards seemed to be holding their breath. The humans have a concept they call deterrence through remembered horror, Gesalec continued. They maintain just enough visible military presence to remind everyone that they're capable of defending themselves. But their real strength lies in what they keep hidden, and in everyone's knowledge of what they're capable of. He gestured to the dead world visible through the window. Miasma isn't just a testament to their vengeance. It's a warning. Every ship that passes through this sector sees it. Every spacer knows its story. And every race in the galaxy remembers. Never push humans to the point where they stop fearing war. The Empress raised her hand again, her 6 eyes fixed intently on Gesalec. You said there was one final part to this story. What happened after there? Reflection. Gesalec nodded slowly. Yes, Your Majesty. Because what the humans did next, how they chose to move forward, that's what truly sets them apart from every other species in the galaxy. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone waited for him to continue. The story of humanity's vengeance was terrifying enough, but their response to their own actions would prove even more remarkable. The legacy of darkness. Gesalec took a moment to gather his thoughts before continuing. After their period of reflection, the humans made a decision that would reshape their entire civilization. They chose to become guardians rather than conquerors. The humans established what they called the Sanctuary Initiative. They began using their military knowledge not for warfare, but for protection. They offered their services as peacekeepers, mediators, and defenders to smaller races who couldn't protect themselves. But here's the irony, Gesalec said. The very reputation that horrified them, their capacity for ultimate warfare, became their greatest tool for peace. Few species would risk starting conflicts when they knew humans might intervene. The Empress leaned forward. They became protectors. After demonstrating such capacity for destruction, yes, Your Majesty, they transformed their darkness into a shield for others. The same tactical genius that had orchestrated the extinction of the Tekarzions was now used to prevent other species from suffering similar fates. The humans developed complex diplomatic protocols, always working to resolve conflicts before they escalated to violence. Their negotiators became renowned throughout the galaxy, not for threats, but for their ability to find peaceful solutions. But they never let anyone forget what they're capable of. Gesalec added, "Every diplomatic mission, every peacekeeping operation carries the implicit warning. Don't make us become what we once were." He turned to the Grand Stratego. "Your intelligence reports about their minimal fleet. That's because their real strength isn't in ships or weapons. It's in their reputation, their history, and their controlled restraint." The humans established training centers where their diplomats learned to project what they called peace through remembered horror. They didn't need to make threats. Simply reminding others of their history was usually enough. "They have a saying," Gesalec continued, "the monster in the dark is scariest before you see it." They understand that the galaxy's fear of what they might do is more effective than any demonstration of what they can do. The Empress's expression had grown thoughtful. "You're suggesting we reconsider our planned campaign?" "Your Majesty, I'm begging you to abandon it entirely," Gesalec replied. "The humans you see now, peaceful, diplomatic, restrained, that's them actively choosing to be better than their nature. But if you threaten them, especially their children,